Yes.
We're ready to go. It's 5:35 and I will call the meeting of the planning committee covered. Commissioner Soltis,
Here.
Snodgrass,
Here.
Bradbury. Okay, Perkar. Jordan
Here.
and our newest member. And so this is,
Here.
and so this is probably the appropriate time for you to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. And the other members.
Do I need the mic or should I just?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Still people on
recording it.
Okay, so, howdy. So it's like, my name's Loretto Tessaccini and so here I am. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, what would you like to know? Maybe
A
I'd,
little bit about your background and what brought you to the planning commission.
okay, so retired from overseas about 5 years ago. And I was with the Foreign Service. And so, you know, basically different assignments in different countries. Prior to that, going back a ways, I worked for a regional park system. And that's probably where I had most of my planning, if you can call it that, experience. I worked on a desert initiative, you know, and working with the public on trying to determine how best to use a desert environment. You know, and it, you know, so that was one of the exciting times to, you know, because you had a lot of competing interests all the way from folks that wanted to open it up and spend, you know, use their four-wheel drives going off in the desert wherever they wanted to all the way to the, you know, close it all off, you know. And so just try to figure out a way of trying to help folks come up with some solutions that would work. And so that was good. And then I also was on the kind of a just a ad hoc planning group when I lived in Montana, you know, for the county, Ravalli County. So the whole county had a population of 35,000 people, which was larger than Pierce. If you can imagine that, you know, so it's like, but it was really good because we were exploring, again, it was again, these competing interests between folks that as people started coming into Montana, especially in the Western Montana, they were buying property that was moving further and further up the Bitterroot Mountains. And so that and then the runoff from their livestock and whatnot was moving downhill and starting to take and get into the groundwater. And so there was all these, old, folks that had property down in the valley, the Bitterroot Valley, were complaining about folks that were above it. So again, I was trying to figure out how to, okay, what are we going to do here? And it was good. So that, I would say those are probably my two experiences. I've never formally been on a planning commission like the one that is here. So I'm really looking forward to it. So.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Okay, so the next item is the approval of minutes from our last meeting. Chair will entertain a motion to approve. Second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion or suggested changes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Any public comments tonight, Michelle? Anybody in the waiting room? Okay, nobody in the audience. So we go to our main item, which is the 2024 comprehensive plan periodic update. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading last week's minutes. That's not the way to do it, John. Okay, so we have the 2024 comprehensive plan update, element 5, environment.
Thank
So,
you.
Robin?
Good evening. Robin Bolster Grant, Principal Planner for all those tuning in the large audience here. Sorry. Just by way of introduction for our newest commissioner, what we have been doing, and I apologize, I was going to do more of a sort of refresh, but hopefully you'll sort of pick up as we go, kind of where this is all sort of coming from, but we have been going through the elements of our existing comprehensive plan. As you are aware, we are in the midst of an update, our periodic update, which is due December 31st, 2024. So we still have, it shortens every time I look at the calendar, my blood pressure goes up a tiny bit. But we're working our way through each of the elements. And the idea here was really just to make sure that commissioners were familiar with the elements, their strengths and weaknesses, identifying as we go some of the things that pop out as obvious pieces that need to be modified. And we could do a deeper dive into each of these elements. We will be coming back, hopefully the beginning of next year, with some proposed changes, actual text amendments. We have a consultant on board who began working with us the beginning of this year. So we did get a little bit of a late start. It was kind of tough to find consultants who were available. Everybody, well, not everybody, but most of the cities and counties in the state of Washington are in the same boat. And so consultants are sort of hard to come by. So again, this is really kind of an overview introduction to the elements, environment, certainly in your wheelhouse. A lot of the comments, I should say, I am kind of falling behind in what I've promised, and that is to incorporate the comments that I've received from the commissioners, each of these several meetings that we've had, and provide those to you so you can sort of follow along. Carl DeSimas, our director, is on a nearly month-long vacation. And so for the past week or so, I have been acting director, and I'm a little behind on providing everybody with comments. And we've tried different sort of approaches to this overview. Initially, we went through each element, the elements that we covered, going through the goals, and then each specific policy. It was taking us, till 8 o'clock, and then in some cases, an extra meeting. So we sort of tried to change direction a little bit and just ask some general questions and then get sort of general feedback from commissioners, whatever works best. I'm very flexible. This is new for me, for sure, and a new process for pretty much everybody, I think. So with that, I will share my screen. I will also say, I guess, since I put it in front of everybody, Vice Chair Soltis earlier this week provided me with some excerpts from Vision 2050, and we'll go into a little bit of what that is if you're not familiar. These are helpful. I don't know that we have time to match and compare, but I think it's a good exercise. So I did want to print these out and provide them to everybody. Again, I'll go into a little bit more detail about what's required, but broadly speaking, our comprehensive plan needs to be consistent with both the county's countywide planning policies put out by Pierce County, as well as the multi-county planning policies that are put out by Puget Sound Regional Council. So there are many layers, and that consistency piece is something that our consultant will be working on. But this is a good sort of introduction to, I think, what that sort of comparing how we've laid out our goals and policies and comparing those to what the county and Puget Sound Regional Council has also put out. So questions as they arise, please don't hold back, and I will go ahead, please.
Just real quick, the consultant you're talking about, was that the same one that was involved in the citizens breakout meetings? Or
Yes, that's Bill Grimes with SCJ Alliance. And yeah, he's been focused primarily on public outreach, but now we're starting to get into kind of more of the meat of looking at specific issues. And we will sneak preview, next time we meet, we will be going over the commerce checklist, which is an exhaustive, and the other commissioners have had a chance to kind of look at that just as an overview, but that's really the basic requirements of what our update needs to accomplish. So that encompasses GMA requirements, Growth Management Act requirements, as well as new legislation. So when we get to housing, which will be fun, that will definitely take more than one meeting, I think. We will see that there's been a bunch of new legislation that needs to be incorporated. So the checklist we'll go through, because our consultant has completed that and we've submitted that to Commerce. So we'll get an idea of some of the nuts and bolts of what we need to submit in order to be compliant and to get our certification. But a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of more high level. What do we want this comprehensive plan to look like, to read? How do we want it to communicate to our community? Because it is their document, which is why we spend so much time on public outreach. It has to incorporate feedback from our community to make it really a living document. And I think the consensus, if I may presume, is that the comprehensive plan we have right now does not really achieve that. It's dry and does not really does not speak to folks in the same way. So that's part of our work moving forward. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And as always, I apologize for my deficiencies in the graphic. Oh, it's not sharing. Well,
Well, I can see it on my screen,
can you?
so it should be showing up there.
I'm not sure what.
Robin,
Yeah.
can we have a chat while you're trying to do that? I got a couple things to bring up, if you don't mind. It's about Loretto, our newest member. I wanted to compliment him. He's already looked at the environmental element, and he noted, as I did not, the one in my massive book that Michelle gave me 4 years ago was OBE. So we had done the climate change amendment to the environmental element. That was part of our work we did to kind of out of cycle. We did the climate change words. So good on him for being a sleuth already. Because that was a last minute midterm change, and now that's part of the environmental element.
It was, and I am chagrined to admit that we did not realize until fairly recently that so we amended 2 elements last year. The Parks, Recreation, Open Space element and the environment element, and capital facilities, but they went together. But what is on our webpage had not been updated. And it was one of those situations where we assumed, always a bad idea, as we know, that our county clerk was updating the website when those amendments were adopted by City Council last year, and that had not happened. And so as I was putting this together, I, in a panic, said, Michelle, can you please help? Can we find that adopted version that includes the climate change piece? So yes, that's why Michelle sent that out this morning as oh, by the way, we did add something. It was a placeholder, as you might have gathered, and we can talk more about that. I can talk, God knows, but you would be missing my really delightful graphics.
So I have a question.
Yep.
And also
bet.
the other thing too, is like if I ask something and it's like, can we table it for offline or something that I fully understand? I don't want to keep.
There it is.
You're
That's
on.
okay. No, please finish your thought.
Well, I was just kind of curious, not having dealt with such a formal comprehensive plan, I don't, how much can it be molded, if you will, by, public input, the folks in this room, that kind of thing. That's a.
Entirely. I mean, the ultimate, city council has the final say in terms of adoption, but as I said, the public participation plan was a separate plan that was adopted by resolution that reflects the importance of, it's why we go, it's why we had our visioning fair and the focus groups, and it's why we're at farmers market every 2 weeks and several other events. We want folks to tell us what they think about a variety of policies, and that will shape how we change this document. And everything that is said here, whether it's the public or whether it's discussion among commissioners, all of that goes into, I'm feeding that to our consultant. It's a lot, but that it goes a very long way. That is the basis for what we will end up proposing when it comes to actually amending the language.
So one last question.
Sure.
Yeah. So on the comprehensive plan, I guess it maybe kind of boils down to the definition of what's considered policy. Could the comprehensive plan also include like strategies for implementation, or is it strictly, I mean, I don't, that's the part.
That's been a hot topic for discussion, because I think your fellow commissioners will tell you that a lot of the language, and you've probably already discovered this, is very broad in many cases and doesn't have a lot of action to it. And so the implementation, I mean, traditionally, the comprehensive plan does function as sort of, the overarching goals, and implementation is generally what we see in our code, right? So land use policies, we want diverse, or pick housing, right? We want, diverse housing types that are affordable or attainable by various, income bands. Well, that will be reflected in our development regulations in our zoning code. So it really depends on the element. Some of that, maybe there's some duplication there. I've looked at some of the other comprehensive plans, and oftentimes it is, develop a policy or develop a program to do, XYZ. It can be very specific, but the bottom line is that anything that is a part of, development is the most obvious example, I guess. But our critical areas, for instance, which are sort of referenced in the comprehensive plan, we have a critical areas ordinance that gives you very, very specific, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not, buffers, all of those things. So it can point to specific actions, but it can also, I think, include actions when that seems appropriate. So whether it's identifying funding sources or something, but it tends to be more general. There's some kind of sweet spot in between, I think, some of the language that we've been going over in these meetings, and something that's a bit more direct. So it will be interesting to take a look at some of the goals and policies that are in Vision 2050, which is, again, Pierce County, sorry, I get my P's and my S's mixed up. Puget Sound Regional Council. When you look at some of their policies, they are more specific than most of ours. So it really is, it really depends on the topic and the policy pieces. Very long answer to your rather short question, sorry. Okay, so here we are, element review. As we know, the environment. I try to distract with pretty pictures, but that doesn't always help. So by way of review again, Growth Management Act, cities and counties fully planning, which we are under RCW, must complete periodic update for the entire comprehensive plan and development regulations every 10 years. Used to be every 8 years. Thankfully, they gave us an extra couple of years because it's such a big endeavor. So the countywide planning policies, CPPs, are about, again, the county, but we are required to be consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of Pierce County. I have found those to be less helpful, frankly, in reading through them. I don't know if anybody else has taken a crack at those. I'm happy to give folks links, but they tend to read, yeah, it's not visionary, I guess, would be the way that I would put it. What I would like, I think a good comprehensive plan or any plan that endeavors to, motivate folks and get people interested in planning in their own community should be somewhat visionary, right? And make you think bigger about the community that you live in and to be engaged. Not to knock Pierce County, but just a little dry. The
Rob?
multi-county,
Excuse me.
oh,
a
go ahead.
comment on that.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree with you.
Yeah.
Although I would say that the county policies are very uneven. There are some that are spot on good ones, and then there's some that are really down in the weeds. So I would say there's value added in looking over those county policies, because some will just jump out at you and demand,
Right.
that is perfect for Big Harbor, but not all.
Well, that would be interesting. And, perhaps as we move, past sort of the introductory sort of part of this, this effort, maybe we have a chance to do some of that comparing. I mean, you can do it now. It's just, it is a little beyond what I envisioned for the rollout of these elements in terms of looking at consistency or comparing. It doesn't mean that I don't value any of the commissioners wanting to, and we've had that. Commissioner Brown looked at other city comprehensive plans and said, hey, I think these guys did a great job of, XYZ. All of that kind of input is welcome. I have not had a chance to go through a whole bunch of different comprehensive plans. I know the ones that I think do a good job, and they're a bit more, like I would say, Vision 2050. So the multi-county planning policies put out, and some of it is superficial for me. Great graphics, I think, tell stories, and it doesn't sound like a substantive critique, I suppose, but I think the absence of images really makes for a tough read, frankly. And maybe that's my bias, but graphs, charts that have some sort of it's conveying information visually. I just think that adds a lot, and we don't have a history of that in our comprehensive plan. So just in comparing, and you're right, there are countywide policies that do a fine job. But as I was comparing just the topic of environment, it was a bit overwhelming. It's like 32 policies and all over the map, right? And so there's a question there about organization and how to convey information in a way that speaks to people and that actually does its job of sort of guiding implementation. Sorry, no questions. Okay. So again, Puget Sound Regional Council works with the folks like us, like Gig Harbor, to coordinate. And all of this is a hallmark of the Growth Management Act, and that is to get everybody to be more or less, rowing in the same direction. We're all supposed to be coordinating our efforts, growing in concert with one another. And so the consistency piece is really important. The PSRC also has a role in certifying both on the county level and our comprehensive plan. Again, ensuring that it is consistent with Vision 2050. It makes it a little bit more challenging because we are certified. We have 2 masters at the end of this process. So the Department of Commerce will be looking to make sure that we've hit everything in their checklist. And then we have a checklist from Puget Sound Regional Council used to focus primarily on transportation because they have, because of funding. There are grants that come from PSRC. They've expanded their purview to encompass housing, and I think kind of want to take over a little bit more oversight. It's just an added challenge. They're not always totally in sync, but they're really important. So as we're going through this, again, maybe not with this overview so much, although I'm happy to weave in both the county and the multi-county pieces, I guess. It's more than I was originally planning on delving into. But I think that I know that there's a role for that. Again, when we get to looking at consistency, as we're starting to develop our proposed changes, new policies, revised policies, we will be looking at that as a group. So I hope that makes sense. So the environment element, surprisingly, maybe not, is not a mandatory element under the RCW. It is, and not every jurisdiction has an environment element. And part of that is because the policies are included in many, many of our other elements. So land use speaks to compatibility and where you should cite different types of uses. Parks, recreation, open space talks about open space and preserving the natural environment. Shoreline management obviously deals with issues of shoreline, and that has to do with protecting habitat and making sure, again, that we have that balance between a built environment and the natural environment. And transportation, multimodal, getting people out of their cars, things like that. So I'm assuming, but I don't know for sure, that because the policies that are about protecting the environment are included in other elements, I must assume that that is why that's not required. But as we all, I think, know at this point, climate change and resiliency will be required under legislation that was passed fairly recently, but that deadline is 2025. So, and there's been some discussion, and we'll talk about this again a little bit, whether we do this now as a part of our periodic update. Do we go ahead and write a climate change element to incorporate environmental, all like the broad environmental policies, which again are everything from protecting resources to conserving resources, but things like clean air, clean water, it's a lot of territory. And so it's something just to consider whether we're going to throw everything into a climate change and resiliency element, or whether we keep our environment element as a separate beast. So please.
That's kind of an issue that cuts across the whole comprehensive plan.
Yep.
Kind of going, different elements go to different other elements that talk about their kind of, you think transportation, electric cars? Well, that's in transportation,
Right.
but should it be in environment/climate? Probably both, but I wonder how that philosophy is really applied across the whole plan, because we got pointers going a lot of different directions right now. And not sure we have the right solution, whether we can consolidate everything in one area where it's always there,
Right.
because then it doesn't sneak up on you. I mean, it's not like hiding under something really big and some other element. But that's sort of a decision as a group we need to probably address. Think, John, how we cross-cut or don't cross-cut.
Right. And sometimes redundancy is not a bad thing, right? You can have policies that reinforce one another as long as it's not confusing, as long as they're not in conflict, or as long as you're not forgetting something. And that is kind of a philosophical question. And at some point, if it would be useful, we can do a comparison with how other comprehensive plans are organized to see how other jurisdictions have tackled that. It's something that we've talked a little bit about with our consultant, but again, we're still, I'm always getting a little ahead, a little over my skis and wanting to, let's start writing stuff already. And we're not there. We have lots more sort of groundwork to lay up front, but it's a conversation that we'll have again and again. And I'm curious about everybody else's perspective on that as we go.
Robin, I would agree with you that I think redundancy can be a good thing, because often if you're looking for something, you don't really quite know where to find it. So you might latch on to a particular topic expecting to see it there, and it's not there, it's somewhere else. So I think it's good. And as you say, consistency is very important as well.
Right. I will say, again, this seems like a really sort of mundane piece, but something that that was pretty critical in my past life in California was a glossary and an index, both. So defining terms and also pointing to where certain topics might live in one or more places. So just guideposts for those lost in the woods, as it were. Okay. So we've talked about this before, and I put it up here because it really is, it is the introduction to our environment element, but it really kind of, it doesn't speak to me with an independent voice. It really just says, well, this is what, the GMA requires. But adopt policies and regulations to address management of resource lands and critical areas, special consideration to conserve and protect anadromous fisheries. Interesting to me. Best available science in protection functions and values of critical areas. And then referencing the Shoreline Management Act. Again, about sort of best available science. I just find that to be sort of an odd overview for the environment element. But I just thought I would put that out there. It sort of, I don't know, it doesn't seem to me to capture everything that we're trying to capture if we indeed keep this environment element as a separate beast. But I thought I would put it up there because that is sort of the introduction, which to me kind of acts as, the overall, this is what we're trying to get to. And it seems a little, I don't know, a little off. Comment, please.
It'll be quick.
Sure.
As far as, it'll be quick as soon as I start talking. As far as introductions to the environmental piece, I don't know what degree in this context, in your job, you can not reinvent the wheel, sort of. Not necessarily, I don't think it's plagiarism. but heavily borrow from other documents. The opening paragraph of the Bainbridge Island one is excellent.
Right, yeah,
I would take that, well, I would take it word for word, I think if I could, or very close to. And that will lead into a much better worded overview, mission statement, whatever, for this element.
right. Just to be clear, that is from Vision 2050. I think the picture is Bainbridge Island, but I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant. Yeah. And that's, I think that I'm really glad that that Vice Chair Soltis, sorry, brought this to our attention, because I think it does a good job of sort of, you know, point counterpoint. This to me is visionary, right? It does sort of, it's loftier, it's more expressive, and it says what I think most of us, you know, it resonates, I guess. And our introduction does not, to me, but that's me.
Robin,
please.
kind of the way I see it, we laid those three things out initially.
Yep.
We've got to probably include something on the Growth Management Act, because it's like it's the mother of all comprehensive plans.
Right.
So I think we just have to kind of recognize, we got to put a couple of things on each of the elements.
Right.
The Growth Management Act references, and just, you know, that space, we've got to contribute to the cause. But then we have the option next to go below, and Commissioner Snodgrass picked up on something right away. There's some really great words out there, and I personally have no problem copying somebody else's great writing. We're all government, you know, we all work for government, right? So the great text in Bainbridge, we ought to go look at any model ordinances we can find. We should talk about them and say, this is it, and use it. I'm sure that PSRC would want us to find the best models out there, and they may actually, there's something they've given us that proposes some of those pieces. So let's not reinvent all the wheels.
Right, at the end, and they do. And if you, for folks who've spent any time on the acronyms are getting to me today, MRSC, the research piece, right? We get a lot of good information from those folks, and they provide, right? These are some great documents you might want to take a peek at. Sharing is a part of this process. So absolutely. In fact, we had a couple grant deadlines last Friday, and I sent some language to folks at Commerce, and they came back with, this is good. But you might also want to take a look at what, and I don't remember Fife. I think you might want to take a look at this piece that Fife came up with, because this is excellent as well, and it fits right in. So your point is well taken. It is not only allowed, it is encouraged to borrow from folks who have already been there and did the work ahead of us. That makes sense to me as well. So again, just comparing countywide planning policy for the environment anyway, did not have a broad goal statement, 31 policies, covering everything, open space, conservation, shoreline, critical area. And as I said before, most of these policies are already included in some of our other elements, including our environment element. So it is, again, the same conversation we just had. Do we leave them in these sort of disparate areas and then recreate or, restate them in the environment element, or does this element seem redundant in and of itself? If we are going to be bringing in climate change, do we say climate change and the environment? Just throwing it out there. I don't know.
May I give a quick bit?
Yep.
There are going to be several things I think we'll find where two different aspects apply to two different elements, or the way I was thinking of just now, maybe an umbrella statement about it applies in environmental, like our overall tree canopy and the diversity of species. for the protection against with climate change, all of that. But in our land use, it's going to be a matter of how many trees are on a lot and how people go about getting a, like how we want to see that on a micro level rather than a macro level. So the environmental tree canopy types of trees across Gig Harbor. In the land use, how we expect commercial or residential landowners or lots development to feel, or how they're arranged, or particular trees are to achieve the goal that is set forth within the environmental element.
I like, that's an interesting approach. I like the phrase, how should development feel? I like that.
I was kind of curious about something. It's like, referring back to the question I had before, and the other thing too is like, you know, we can table this and move off to something else, you know, because but I was just kind of wondering, you know, it's like the whole thing on climate change. And, you know, some folks got it as a kind of like an existential issue. And other folks, you know, you got the whole range, right? People who say, but my sense is here in Gig Harbor that at least in the city, that it's perceived as being serious. And so I was just kind of wondering, could it be the underpinnings for, you know, coming up with maybe some kind of guidelines, core principles, if you will, that basically supported all the elements in a way? Not that it would be like, I don't know, housing would only say, you know, not having to force it to that, but just saying like, it might be a way of helping to kind of knit together what, you know, because you're talking about how it seems kind of like fractionated at times, be a way of pulling that to get, you know, giving it some kind of.
Everything that we do here should not be to the detriment of right, the sort of overarching, probably existential crisis that we have. So everything should feed into and support the climate change and resiliency element to some extent. That's an interesting perspective. I can see that. Please. Oh, sorry. I'm calling on people.
Can you remind me,
Mm.
and it might be helpful for my commissioners, fellow commissioners. So the comp plan is kind of like guiding aspirational goals, policies. So as an example for climate change, you might say like, you know, we aspire to reduce our carbon emissions by some percentage, something like that, as an example. And then there would be regulations that come, the question I have is there's regulations, correct, that would come later that we wouldn't have to, that we're not necessarily here to that today, that would come later to meet the goals and policies of the comp plan. Do I have that right?
To some extent, it's not a perfect sort of linear progression, right? So if you have an overarching policy, which I think, you know, we started to introduce last year. So develop and adopt a climate action plan, which we have almost. Come up with strategies, develop strategies for, you know, reducing carbon footprint, just as a sort of one example of a broader statement. And then you have more specific policies that talk about diversified energy sources, so that you could drill down a little further to talk about pursue, you know, grant opportunities that fund, you know, projects that, you know, we have charging stations throughout the city or something. So that's mid-range specific, right? You can certainly talk about actions that you want to take, and then as a part of your development regulations, for instance, require that every development, you know, pays an impact fee, or if it's a commercial development, has to supply 2 charging stations or something. So there are degrees of granularity that I think depend on the policy topic that we're talking about. So same thing with housing or whatever, require, diverse housing types throughout the city is pretty broad. But you could get down into our housing. One of our consultants came up with a map that you folks saw on June 1st, right? That showed opportunity areas. You could incorporate that and say these opportunity areas shall be prioritized for rezoning, increased density, whatever. And then ultimately you're going to get the development regulations that say thou shalt, whatever, or you're rezoning or whatever you're doing. So I think some of these, again, there's an in-between policy piece, I think, if that makes sense. So the very broad, something more specific that has action associated. We're going to do something, pursue, develop, and then the development regulations or zoning changes would actually be kind of the meat and potatoes. That's where the rubber hits the road. Thou shalt do this if you want to develop here or something. Does that answer your question?
That's really helpful. I'm trying to kind of, for my own thinking, giving feedback to you all as staff is like with the strategic plan, you'd have goals, you'd have mission, vision goals. And then you might get down to the implementation strategies, like key initiatives. And then, but beyond that, I feel like there's less bang for the buck at our level, be spending a lot of brain space on that.
We're not really here to develop the specific policies, but we overarching.
Not yet. I will say that part of the comp plan, we haven't talked about it as much. We will. But part of this whole endeavor is to update development regulations. So we are required to, and we'll deal with that at our next meeting when we look at the checklist. And I think did I send everybody a copy of the checklist when we first started this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at that, there are very specific requirements that we have to abide by in our zoning code. So it's not all just the comp plan. So critical areas we have to update to reflect legislation. Some of the housing stuff we have to actually present to your commission and to the city council proposed changes to our development regs. So we are going to get more granular in certain areas. Now, why those areas are picked over others, I couldn't tell you, but we will delve into where the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
I had a side comment to that. I think great comment about hierarchies, and I think we need to establish, and this is for future comments, Robin.
Yep.
The same hierarchy kind of ought to apply to all the elements. I mean, we can't just have goals, policies, plans, actions different, too different across the elements. I think they are quite different right now as you read through different chapters. And like transportation, like, I don't know, they have 5 goals and there's other ones that have 25 goals.
Right.
And what's bigger than transportation in the city? Do we really need 25 goals for some smaller chapter? Or is transportation's 5 goals too few? So as we go through these, I think we need to kind of be mindful what's a reasonable hierarchy given the importance of the element. And we should work towards it. And I'd say also the climate action plan is an interesting example because they're going to have the top few tiers in the plan, but implementation is probably going to be elsewhere. If I haven't seen the final plan, but I think that's the kind of thing that gets done kind of like a development reg,
Right.
implementation plan, detailed implementation. Do teach 5 seminars or whatever you want to do, change 5 vehicles to electric. That's not really a plan.
Right.
Kind of component, I don't think, but it's somewhere else in the city's documentation chain.
Probably so. And it's interesting that you point to transportation. For those who have been brave enough to look at the transportation element, it is it's giant and it has a ton of data, and the decision was made in 2018 to just take the work that had been done for transportation. So all of, traffic counts and levels of service and all of that, and just take it wholesale and just make it the element instead of a separate plan. And we have the same decision to make with Parks, Recreation, Open Space. As the commissioners probably know, we have a Parks, Recreation, Open Space PROS plan separate and apart from our comprehensive plan. It has an inventory of all the parks and categories of parks and ways of measuring level of service, a whole bunch of great stuff. But the idea was, at least at one point, we haven't landed yet, to take that. Why have two plans? Or why have an element over here in the comp plan and a separate plan? It's confusing. So the initial idea was to just take that PROS plan and make that the Parks, Recreation, Open Space element. But that changes up that sort of trajectory or that rhythm that you're talking about with the hierarchy, because it is very specific. It is about each park, how big it is. It's pretty granular. And so it really, there's no right or wrong to that. And like the environment, there's not Parks, Recreation, Open Space is not actually a required element, but it's an interesting discussion point to see if it's more important or as important to have each of these elements have a similar feel and look and functionality, or if they really are so different. Some things, when we get to, and it'll probably be a rather short discussion, when we get to capital facilities, that is literally an inventory of our facilities, and then funding mechanisms for how to upgrade what we have using our population projections. It's not super lofty. It's not aspirational or visionary. It is pretty, just bare bones. These are how many, this is our stormwater infrastructure, and these are our, water and all the rest. So they are going to look different in by definition, or by the way they're laid out and the requirements. But I like, and I agree that there should still be some level of hierarchy, and at least try to make some of them, look like the rest.
Robin, in those cases where we have plans like parks and recreation
Mhm.
facilities, can we have goals and then incorporate those inventories by reference?
We can, and we actually do. If you look at the current element, Parks, Recreation, Open Space element, it refers, because we also have not updated that, it refers to the 2016 PROS plan, soon to be updated on the website. I mean, it does. It says, this is what we did with this other plan. And so it does incorporate it by reference, but it's strange because they didn't communicate. There were different ways of measuring. And we'll go into this when we get to the PROS, but element. But that was part of the confusion. And I think that was part of why the initial idea was to just bring it in and make it the element, because it was the comp plan was referencing the PROS plan, but imperfectly. And every time. And the other thing about having very specific lists, inventory lists, and you can't get away from it with capital facilities. Again, it's just the nature of the beast. But it means every time you add or change your inventory, or you finish a project, or you've completed a transportation, capital project, you have to go back and change your comp plan. And that's a little clunky to say the least. And you don't want to wait 10 years to change it. We do a 5-year kind of check-in, so we don't have to wait 10 years, but it's a little easier to be able to reference a document that can be changed more frequently it's again, it's another sort of no right answer, philosophical kind of choice to make about whether you are very specific about inventory is the easiest example in your comp plan, if that's changing all the time. And parks may not change all the time, but they change a lot. So I think that was the original idea of keeping them separate. But it is also confusing. So we can talk more about that. And those are the kinds of questions, I don't know that the average Gig Harbor citizen is super concerned. Oh, that's, you have two plans and wait, this is the comp plan. I don't know that it's probably more for nerdy planners and nerdy planning commissioners to chew on. But as a matter of day-to-day planning operations, that it can be confusing and more work for staff, honestly.
Just a time check because we're about an hour in and I'm not sure we got off the introduction. How many slides do you have today?
40? No, I don't. No, I don't. I just have a few that, and I didn't go through all the policies. So I was doing the sort of short and sweet on these goals.
I just want to make sure we're not holding you way back. Or maybe me.
I am here for you. Discuss away and I will continue to take notes. And I swear I'm going to give you these notes before I retire. All right, we've been through this. We can go quickly, but I did want to capture the goal. Again, this is the PSRC's Vision 2050 that we all have copies of. I like the way it sounds. Their goal statement to me is it just reads better and feels more aspirational, and I like it better. The region cares for the natural environment by protecting and restoring natural systems, conserving habitat. And you can read the rest.
Robin, the problem with that one is there's nothing in there about climate change.
They have a separate, I gave you 2 documents. They are brilliant. They saw the writing on the wall, apparently. And there is an environment and there is a climate change.
Okay, so they've covered it somewhere else. Then.
Yep, sorry. Should be in the other piece that I gave you is also from Vision 2050, and that is climate change. So they're ahead of the curve a little bit. There's the climate change piece. So the region substantially reduces emissions of greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change in accordance with the goals of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. And they give you numbers and prepares for climate change impacts. So that's pretty high level, but they also have numbers in there. I don't know if that adds. I think it's interesting and good information, but it's just an interesting place to insert the numbers. I don't know. But that's what PSRC does with their Vision 2050. And thank you again, Commissioner Soltis, for
Well,
bringing
I
that.
think the
Sorry.
numbers are important
Yeah,
because quite honestly, I don't think most people are taking this seriously, or they may take it seriously in the back of their mind somewhere, but then they go out and they buy a gas guzzling pickup truck or SUV. Or
This is
live in
true.
a 4,500 square foot home. And that's the kind of thing that I'm seeing on the ground, is that people really are not changing their habits, trying to adapt to solve this problem. And ultimately, when it comes down, it comes down on all of us. We all are going to have to make some changes.
you bet. Yeah, I don't know about you. I don't have air conditioning in my house, and yeah, it's very hot.
It kind of like, sparked a, a neuron was, maybe there's it's like something like an assessment of vulnerabilities. Kind of like a vulnerability assessment, something where it's kind of like, because it's going to be different for different regions. It's gonna be different for like city versus a rural town.
Mhm.
The vulnerable, whether you have a harbor or whether you're inland. So what would be the vulnerability list, if you would, coming up with, I don't know, just stake in the ground kind of deal for Gig Harbor. And then to your point, taking it from there and going, as part of it. So it's like as just one element of it.
Right. Well, and the resiliency piece of the required changes, that deals with your specific, how are you dealing with the risk of sea level rise, of increased extreme weather, heat that we're having, wildfires that we haven't seen. How are different communities dealing with their particular risk? And so when we get to that piece, again, that's June of 2025. It's both climate change and resiliency. So that will address specific measures that we need to take and be aware of the risks to our particular region. And interestingly, Pierce County has already changed their flood mapping. And so they're already accounting for it. They're not taking FEMA's data as far as I can tell, but they've increased the areas of potential floodplain along even just the shores of Gig Harbor. So yes, the only thing about the numbers here, I thought it was, they're good, but it's kind of like, look what we did, instead of, sometimes fear works to motivate. So look, we've done this, we've substantially reduced, which is true, but it doesn't sort of leave you with, okay, well, we obviously need to do a lot more, kind of a thing, to your point. Okay, now, look, Gig Harbor, finally, sorry. So goal 5.1, respect the natural environment. It's hard to argue with respecting the natural environment. So the policies under this heading, wetlands to septic systems, bedrock. I guess, again, this goes back to the question that I keep revisiting. Does it make sense to lump these policies together under this heading? And again, some policies that are under this section are also, the last policy under this goal talks about functions of shoreline vegetation. So it's just an open question, redundant or useful to deal with the shoreline under this very broad heading of respecting the natural environment, and how well does that goal speak to what we want it to speak to, I guess.
Some data here, how many miles of shoreline do we actually have that are in the city?
In one of the appendices of the comp plan.
It is in appendix.
Get that to you tomorrow.
I don't know that off the top of my head, specific to Gig Harbor or the whole, including the UGA and the county
Both,
portion.
actually.
Okay,
Yeah, I like to see it for both,
okay. I'll find out.
because
we'll
I
get
think that tells us how much of a priority we want to make that,
Oh,
depending upon what we're actually talking about there.
interesting. Okay.
Robin, critical areas,
Yep.
wouldn't those be isn't that the right set of definitions to put here, rather than all these 9 or 10 other things? Are they overlapping? Are they different somehow? But I've seen the word critical areas a lot, some of the documents.
Well, critical areas, their own, right? We have a whole separate ordinance that covers critical areas, and there is overlap with shoreline and our shoreline management. So I guess, it depends. So critical areas both touch shoreline, also wetlands and things. I guess I'm just struck by how broad the goal is. I guess I'm still stuck on respect the natural environment. it seems like that could be drilled down a little bit more to talk about protection versus some of these things, landslide, erosion. You need protection from those things as well as protecting against them. Maybe that's just my brain working in a weird way, but it just seemed like some of these are geologic hazards, for instance. I mean, that could be sort of a separate goal to me, rather than protecting habitat, species specific. But again, that's maybe not. I just seems like it's so you've got some habitat protection. Go ahead, please. Sorry.
I just had a quick question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So are you sort of hoping to divide them between ways we, through our policy, can protect the environment or as opposed to ways through our policy, we can protect our residents against catastrophe in the environment?
I think so. I think so. I think that they strike me personally as two different.
Well, then it sounds like those should be broken out as such. Well,
Didn't mean
because
to
they
lead
could
you.
be-
That's just, yeah, go ahead,
We do to
please.
protect, particular plants
Right.
or trees of a certain size, et cetera, is going to go under how the first goal, how we protect the natural environment. Whereas setbacks I wouldn't want to put setbacks as a policy issue that I don't know if it should be. If it is mentioned, it should be in a more broad way within here, but how things like setbacks protect our residents from risk in the natural environment.
Right. I guess it's the respect piece. Of course, we should respect the natural environment. It just strikes me as, I don't know. I will move on. It just seems odd. Protect, concern. I mean, there's the second, we'll talk about the goal 5.2 is about conserving natural resources. Respect seems, a little light to me, rather than protection, right? Please.
Could you just add it in there to say like
Yes.
respect and protecting or just protect or?
Sure, of course, absolutely. But I don't want to insert my my own biases into the conversation. I mean, if it makes sense to, respect,
It's not a good word.
I just,
That is too.
it's
focused, generic.
fluffy, yeah.
You see, respect the transportation system? I don't think so. That is residual from the people walking around with their 10 ponytails. It's more than respect, it's protect.
Protect.
That is right.
Thank you. And then, yeah, and maybe some of these hazards, protect against or something. I don't know, just, it just seems like a funny, sort of strange bedfellows to talk about, wetlands, and landslides, as sort of the same type of concern. Landslides, nobody likes landslides, but that is, yeah. We can play around with the language. That struck me as kind of just kitchen sink. It's like they kind of threw in like, oh yeah, and this sort of just odd. Okay. And I will find out how many miles of shoreline we have. Michelle is coming up with that answer as we speak because she's Michelle. That's what she does. Okay, we'll keep going here. So goal 5.2, conserve natural resources and activities. So policies here include protecting, again, harbor resources, and extractive activities, agriculture, timber. General question, do these topics make sense here? Mineral resources,
Do we really have any extractive activities going on in the city?
No, well,
Well,
some mineral we do. I don't know how much is still, but we certainly have had quarries. I don't know that we have any active quarries currently.
But I don't know,
Um,
do we have any, well, there's always urban farms, people growing vegetables in their backyard, but that's hardly what I would consider. agriculture.
Right. And it talks, the specific policy, under this heading, talks about, it starts saying, although agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance have not been identified within the city's urban growth area, lands outside of the UGA should not be considered for inclusion into the, urban growth area. And then they talk about Crescent Valley should not be considered for any urban services until the year 2010. That clearly needs to be, yeah. It's just odd. Again, it just struck me as if we have ag land that I am not aware of, and maybe there's some on the boundaries, maybe there's some in the UGA. Oh, I know there is in the UGA. I'm not sure, honestly, about whether there's anything within the city limits. We can talk about maybe, not annexing or developing any of the perimeter areas that have, at this point dwindling ag resources. But it seems like we want to kind of land one way or the other. This existing language seems kind of odd.
Looks like they cut and pasted from Pierce County. Maybe that where they got all that resource extraction stuff. Do they still do some of that out there?
They do.
Screen it for what makes sense for Gig Harbor and Ruskin. You got other more important plans to do.
So I was kind of wondering, like, on the title or the first line, we had like conserve and expand when and where possible. The natural resources and activities. And so like, say, like, if it did wind up being, there would be an annexation that in that process of annexing an area that try to, as part of this thing, as his goal would be to say, okay, what can we preserve, and actually add and expand to the city of Gig Harbor as far as a green belt or whatever,
So according to the SMP's table, we have approximately 46,674 feet of shoreline or 190 acres.
You convert that to miles.
I was trying to my mom to convert that to miles.
Yeah, we have it divided into 6 separate segments.
Okay, could you email us that?
Yep, I can email you the table.
So I'll never remember it by the time I get home.
That's why I can't remember it either.
Chair, on this one, this language, I think, you, as staff, you should go with your gut. I mean, if it looks goofy and feels goofy, you're probably not gonna get a lot of feedback, or gut from us on this. However, on this natural resource and activities, I don't think it's worth a lot of energy, but maybe there's a new natural resource that we're not aware of, or maybe we annex. I think that's a good point. So something along the lines of, steward natural resources and activities, and just be fairly, generic in that, but I wouldn't get rid of it.
Okay.
Just because we may need this policy someday.
The reasons we none of that today.
And
Okay.
this is
Oh,
just
please.
like, maybe this is too deep in the weeds, but 5.2.2, I'm like, kind of. Those last couple of lines, I'm just going like, what?
I think maybe Commissioner Soltis had it right, that could have just been cut and paste right out of Pierce County, since that almost the entire Crescent Valley, that is Pierce County, that is not city of Gig Harbor. So Yeah. Oh, no. It's okay. We lost my very, very stimulating PowerPoint. Okay, I like that, yeah, new natural resources, definitely interesting. And I wonder how that, for some reason, when you said that, it made me think of, like, solar access and wind farms and things like that as resource areas to consider. So I like that. We do need, turns out, lithium kind of important. Oh. Okay. Oh, we're back. Oh. So yeah, and then just the comment, just the habitat protection, I guess it just, there's still something fundamentally not jiving to me about, protecting mineral resources or whatever, and then habitat in the same breath. Different kind of resource to me, but that's just me. We move on. I will come back and we're revisiting all these when we get to, actually changing the stuff, and again, some of it's just, like that one piece you pointed out, just, I think, threw me for a loop a little bit. Next, we have land management policies. And so this actually has sort of a little heading that's sort of helpful in trying to figure out what they're getting to or wanting to get to, allocating and managing the land's environmental capabilities and suitabilities in the most reasonable and effective manner, allow innovation and flexibility, yet ensure the environment is not, whoops, that should be not degraded, or that urban uses do not create public hazards or nuisances. I found this to be really, really interesting, but not useful. But I thought it was interesting for some reason. So land suitability, this to me seems like a land use kind of a discussion. And again, maybe this is one of those redundancies where, of course, we want land uses that pose the fewest environmental risks. That should be part of our land use goal statement as well. Does it make sense to have it here?
I was just going to ask, if you left it here, it might make a lot more sense to cut the first paragraph, cut the third paragraph, and change the middle paragraph to say something, policies under this heading will adhere to policies set forth in the, what?
Reference back
Yeah.
to land
yes,
use.
Exactly. Policies within the land use element of this comprehensive plan will reflect the environmental goals and
Mhm.
policies as defined here. Something to that effect, so that people, like, you respect, yeah, we know, and everything in that land use is going to take into account these things that we are concerned about.
Right. And I think it occurred to me when we were talking earlier about the redundancy, that I don't see any harm in referring back to, as stated here, or to expand upon something stated here. We further, believe so-and-so. What I didn't talk about up here, it was the performance criteria. I don't know if anybody read that. It's 5.3.2. It says, as much as practical, incorporate environmental concerns into performance standards rather than outright restrictions. Use review processes which establish minimum performance criteria, which landowners and developers must satisfy in order to obtain project approvals. It goes on to say, allow for innovation, more detailed investigations. I'm not sure exactly what they were getting at, but I think it sort of goes to your point earlier about, when we were talking about hierarchy and all of that. This seems to point to a pretty specific idea that somebody had about how we evaluate environmental issues, or, development, that balance between development and preserving the environment by having performance standards. I just don't know what those standards exactly are, what they were referring to, but I think it's interesting. It goes on to talk about avoiding contamination or degradation of wetlands. So I think, I think they're getting to sort of the idea of buffers and things like that, but I'm not sure, but it's an interesting idea to me to, to sort of drill down into performance criteria that I don't think it doesn't point to anything specific,
Robin,
so I don't know.
If
Please.
there's no one in the collective knowledge within the planning department that can explain what any of that meant, it serves no purpose. And whether or not I think performance standards belong in a comp plan, there should definitely be discussion of benchmarks
Right.
and meeting those and, but it goes on to say in the middle,
Mhm.
landowners and developers must satisfy in order to obtain project approvals. Well, we've talked about the stuff that goes into land use. That
Right.
goes into our, wherever we were talking about climate change, the tree canopy, all of that. It's incorporated into other things and it kind of muddies the water the way they've written it and added it here.
I agree. I think, I mean, and we can think about it or talk about it again, but if it was specific to trees or to, wetlands or something, not that this is the right place for that, but if it was specific by saying, wetlands shall be evaluated, using best available science to, determine impacts or something like that. If it was specific to a category of resource or potential impact, I could sort of maybe get my arms around it, because it does sort of start to achieve that middle ground between sort of loftier, 20,000 foot view to something that's more action oriented for sure, without specifying what those buffers would be if it's a buffer. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's sort of, performance criteria as a general sort of topic, I think can be really useful if we drill down a little bit. But this seems like a funny place for it, and to me, it's very vague about what they're trying to measure and how we would go about that. But it does give this sort of, flexibility and innovation, which also are intriguing to me.
But isn't that really something for the development regulations? That's be a component of your design and development regulations. Because I know this is probably put in there because somebody didn't want to be held to a specific environmental standard. They want to be able to propose something that's might sort of violate that, but still meet the intent and get them more units on the piece of property. So that's a development reg to me.
It feels like somebody pro-development type person maybe helped put that in there, but I don't know that that buys you much all by itself, because again, it doesn't point to what type of development, what type of resource are we protecting or not protecting. But it's so, well, I kind of have a little mini star next to it to sort of see if this is one of those things where I'm curious to look at other comp plans to see how, because we do have, as we were talking about before, the pros plan, the parks, rec and open space, and the transportation element talk about levels of service, which is a different way of measuring. That's a type of performance criteria. How are our intersections performing? Levels A through whatever, F, D, whatever. Are they measuring up? And so we do have a type of performance criteria when we look at how our infrastructure is operating. So it's not totally alien, but in this context, I'm just my curiosity is piqued. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. We're getting there. 5.4 urban land use operating standards. Again, this is getting into some maybe drilling down a little bit and a little more granular. So I'm going to read the first paragraph there. Establish minimum acceptable performance standards governing noise, air, light, glare, and other operating characteristics of or permitted urban uses. That is an or, which affect the quality of the man-made environment. Operating standards, performance standards, again. So noise, specific to Narrows Airport. We don't have definitions about, they talk about obnoxious, like they're these other people. Our comp plan talks about obnoxious or distracting noises without defining. I will say in the general plan in Santa Cruz County, the only place we had any decibel thresholds for noise was in our general plan, similar to a comp plan. It didn't exist in our zoning code or any of our ordinances. It lived in the general plan for no particular reason. So I thought it was interesting. So they talk about operating standards without providing measurements or definitions. Just odd. And then, so my other question is, they lump groundwater, stormwater standards. Are those the same type of standards? Because we do have a stormwater comprehensive plan. Anyway, just random sorts of organizational questions for your perusal and discussion if you choose.
Actually, I'm not too terribly concerned about that first paragraph. I think it's actually probably pretty good. The second paragraph, however, they talk about including noise from the Narrows Airport. Narrows Airport isn't the biggest source of noise. It's Highway 16. Far and away.
I think you're absolutely right about that. So I don't know what the issue with the airport was when this was put in here. And what do you think?
It depends on how long ago it was, because Highway 16 wasn't always as busy
Oh, that's true.
as it is right now.
Very true.
It probably didn't have nearly the truck traffic that creates a lot of that noise.
Right. I mean, it does, and the comp plan policy also references State Route 16, but it seems to be particularly focused on the airport for whatever reason. And again, this is just probably my thing. I went through these policies and they just seem really different to be lumped into this one heading. And that seems to be sort of a common feature of this particular element. They didn't know how to categorize these things, or they didn't not a lot of thought was put into how to separate them out. But it just seems odd to lump noise with groundwater contamination. That just seems odd to me. So.
Yeah, the groundwater should be a separate, separated from all of this. And I think that is a concern. I think, getting maybe much too specific, I think the idea of having a lot of septic tanks in the city is something that the city should be working to eliminate.
I believe we are.
A couple of comments.
Yeah, please.
These the last couple of goals are not stated with the action verb. It's just like words that are standard. Is that a goal? Are you saying develop standards?
Right.
Or are we saying something different? No. So we ought to have the same flow in all the goals. It ought to be like action oriented, right?
Yep.
It's not like a statement. And the second thing on that, there's a lot of commonality between environment and stormwater issues.
Mhm.
You know, you want to do green infrastructure, that's, you know, good for stormwater and good for the environment. So that we really gotta work these hooks back and forth and always have something that we can go from one to the other. Say you want more on stormwater, then you go to the stormwater plan, but here's some high level things that we're working towards. So the hooks is really important. Maybe
Great.
so people can go from one to the other.
Commissioner, I might be disagreeing in my mind with you. So, if it's a stormwater goal or policy or action, I think it should go in the stormwater section of the comprehensive plan. And if we're gonna ask staff to like cross-reference all the different chapters and possible topics, so maybe there's some high level, we like clean stormwater and the environment, that's a lot, but then go see the real meat and potatoes in the stormwater section of the comp plan. One, I don't think it's a good use of, I don't think it's efficient, and two, it's a lot to ask staff because there's gonna be tremendous overlap. So I was kind of preparing my concluding comments, and one of them was if a goal or an action fits in a more logical chapter, just move it and kind of streamline this thing. But I don't think that's what you said.
No, I was not saying that.
Yeah.
I don't. It's a valid option, for sure. It's, you know, there's nothing is, they're both imperfect. I guess which of the imperfects do you pick? Because you're gonna lose something from either direction. I would think that the professional comprehensive plan writers have run across this before, and there must be some state-of-the-art solution to it. How do they deal with it when it happens?
I definitely turn to our consultants with a lot of questions like this. The response is, he certainly, and his team can point to what other folks have done. And that really is, it goes back and, you know, we've talked about that before. What do we like? Because there are plenty of comp plans very similar to ours that have these disparate pieces and overlap and stuff that doesn't make sense because they were trying to meet a deadline and get something in there or whatever. So there are good and bad. What we want ultimately is ease of use. I appreciate concern for all of our staff and staff time. I think that some redundancy is fine. We have plenty of it. But it, as we've talked about before, it has to make sense. So if we had 1,000 miles of shoreline, then you'd see shoreline pretty much popping up everywhere. And that makes sense to me. And maybe ultimately that is part of, what we, I don't know how we would ask, I'm not going to ask the public about how they feel. Where do you want the stormwater policies to be? But how these things are valued, how, and stormwater in and of itself is not something that grabs people's attention. But flooding is, but contamination of our harbor is, and erosion and all of those things. So I think there are ways that we can sort of get a sense of what makes sense, depending on who is looking at this and why. So like I said, stormwater, as long as, so some of these operating standards have to do with public education and not making sure that fertilizer and pesticides don't get into our groundwater. There are ways of I think, getting help prioritizing where we put the stuff and how important it is to have it in more than one place. Stormwater is an odd example, I suppose, but I'm okay with some redundancy. I am. It's a living document. We can, and the stormwater plan separate and apart from this, we can do a find and replace or find copy and paste and we can figure it out, but it has to make sense. It has to be because it makes sense in more than one place. So I'm open to that.
Kind of like, just want to tag on the living document piece, because, you know, in the back of my mind, I see this kind of minor tsunami wave coming in later on next year with the citizens input and the CCC pack and all, you know, that, and that's gonna, I'm sure gonna influence some of, or all of it. You know.
It is. And yeah, I don't have the sort of calendar up, but we have transitioned from sort of the initial, so the comp plan update process is broken into sort of 3 phases. The first phase was the vision thing and sort of, you know, what do people envision their community to be. The next phase that we are now moving into, July, is devoted to specific issues. And then the last piece, which would be mostly next year, will be scenarios where we sort of start to say, okay, this or this. I'm not 100% sure where all of these conversations fit into that, but we will be starting to vet some of these different choices to folks about you know, prioritization and all of that. I'm not sure where I was going with that. I don't know if I was answering your question or just free associating.
Oh, no, that helps, but I was just kind of wondering, like, if there's, you know, the perception by the
Yeah.
staff that there's already, you know, things shaping a little bit, I mean, maybe we could take a look at it, or is that like illegal or something? I don't know, like, where we could, you know, so instead of getting us being hit and you guys being hit down the road, but that's humongous amount of whatever it's, you know.
So, well, a couple different things. We'll all be hit with stuff. I don't know that it will be this granular, right? What we're talking about with, you know, where do stormwater policies live? I don't think that that's super high on people's radar. I think when we start talking about housing and transportation, we will be getting into the weeds more than with this stuff. I think the way, and I'll talk to Bill. We have a check-in every other week. So I always like to bring back the discussions that we've had in these meetings. And he puts it into his little machine, his little mixer machine. And he will have some input back or output. And some different options to answer these questions. But that he's taking all of this in, I guess is my my general response. I'm feeding with my own sort of input, but his one of his mandates from us is to make this document read, look, feel consistent, the same-ish, and have it be something that makes sense. So we will be going through some of this more granular stuff, but the public is not going to be a part of all of those conversations. It's just not, that's not where their interest is, frankly. And we will have, you know, drafts of all these elements. They will be put out there for folks to comment on. But at the end of the day, you know, not everybody's gonna get what they want out of this. And it'll be up to you folks and city council to make the final call. So yeah, it is a lot. Oh. Nice. All right. We have, unless there's something else more general, and I really appreciate this. It really is helpful. The final goal is the one that we adopted last year. And that would be develop and adopt a climate action plan. Hooray, we're almost there. So we almost have a climate action plan. Adopted, well, sorry. I'm trying to read my own notes. The goal was adopted last year, not the climate action plan. We don't have that quite yet. But I will read the goal statement here, which I didn't put up there. The city will develop and adopt a climate action plan to include a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, climate change mitigation strategies for buildings, transportation, and natural systems, strategies for climate change adaptation, community education and outreach through a lens of equity and social justice. Okay, that's jam-packed. Now, the fact that we are in the process of developing and will soon be adopting a climate action plan means that this is very, very shortly going to be obsolete. We will have to figure out. So the question, I guess, one of the questions that I'm posing to your commission is, should the cap, once it is adopted, be incorporated in its entirety as an element, or as separate policy statements and goals, and whatever thoughts you have on that. And that's another, it's like the pros plan, right? And here's a pros plan and here's a pros element, and here's a transportation plan, here's the transportation element. Does it make sense? Or do we wait and see?
Robin, it's too important not to be in the comprehensive plan. It's right up there with housing and transportation.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you. But, and we also, we also need to develop our resiliency component of that. So that would be a separate subsection of an element, if not its own. So that is, in your opinion, would that climate action plan be the, well, I said, if it is the element, do we leave this environment element separate with the fixes and things that we've talked about? Does this still live as a separate element, just based on our discussion today? What do you think?
Like hear from some of the others.
I have a thought on this. It's kind of a general comment, but I think it plays into this. I think that we should not delay to 2025 doing a climate change and a climate resilience elements. We should roll that into this job. It's all part and parcel. And why are we going to wait a couple more years? Is there that much time left to get going? So I would say one is we need to bump that forward. And my second suggestion is kind of a bigger one. Maybe we do something kind of crazy, like combine climate action plan, the urban forestry management plan, and the environmental activities that we've got into something called like a sustainability element that includes all three of those things. That people that care about those three will probably care about one of those, will probably care about all of those. And maybe that's a kind of a way to slip it in, you know, not got climate change in people's face that they kind of don't really, there are people sometimes have a big problem with that. But those space things are very, to me, very close to kin. And maybe that would be another option. I don't know if the commissioners want to bat that out or think about it, but I propose that as one way to go forward.
I like that idea. What do the rest of you think?
I'd say, yeah, definitely. And I'd say even go further, in a way, but maybe, because I think we were talking earlier, you're saying like the harbor is in a lot of people's minds, really, really important. And so like underneath, like as part of this thing would be the health of the harbor. I mean, literally the aquatic element of the harbor and bring that in, like here and there as part of this thing and saying like, to be able to help, just the wording around that, to be able to bring all some of this other, not that it's the focal point, but just have that in there as well or something. I don't know, but maybe it's just amongst us that. My bias is that, it's not gonna be a couple of years and all hell's gonna break loose in the environment, but what we're doing now is going to be setting, the guide rails going forward for the next generation, right? That kind of deal. And so I think it's really, really important to kind of like bring it to almost make the statement by the city to say, it's not just an element. It's the, it's infusing every action or every element within the comprehensive plan. And so I'm totally behind that.
Cool.
All I ask is that if we are putting, like combining those plans, we aren't just dropping that whole plan into the urban forestry plan and the climate action plan, all those, just dropping the entire plan into the comp plan because no one's ever gonna read that. Like any of it, as soon as you see this or, 1,400 pages, they're not gonna read it. So this is one of those times where, yes, it's redundancy, but in a much more abbreviated form. We take some of the goals, we cover some of the major actions, policies that are within that as the subsets of the goal for each one, and we move on under this umbrella of environment and those two goals of one, protecting critical areas and the natural environment and protecting the residents from crisis within the natural environment. It's not put it that way, but
I totally agree with Vice Chair. And I like the idea of a sustainability chapter. I would like the climate action plan, super important, but maybe adopted by reference. I don't think we want and create some policies that support the implementation of the climate action plan in the comp plan, but not just to adopt the climate action plan as part of the comp plan.
So that's kind of similar to Commissioner Snodgrass, facilities. We would take some high level portion of urban forestry plan, climate action plan, and bring that into sustainability element, but not the whole. We wouldn't have all the gritty details in there.
Yeah, but those plans would be available as a way we could charter a course. And the comp plan should promote, adherence and action under those plans.
So if, converting the city vehicle fleet to electrical vehicles
Mhm.
would be sort of goal in the plan.
Well,
Then the implementation would be something more specific and not.
yeah, as an example, the city should, easy for me to say, the city should say something like in the comp plan, we are going to have 0 emissions by 2040 for our scope 1, scope 2 emissions. So scope 1 is their equipment, their fleet. And then under that, and scope 2 is the energy they purchase. And then under this, that to me is a comp plan type goal. And then how we execute on that would be what you just said, Commissioner, which is they're going to purchase 0 emission vehicles by 2035. Right, in a comp plan.
That model might be the right one to propose to, extract the high level thing from the pros plan. Don't try to bring it all in. Can we do that for transportation too?
I know. I hate that thing. It's an encyclopedia unto itself. Yeah, I'm certainly willing to put that on the list. Because I think it's in my comp plan that I carry around because I'm old and I actually have a printed version, but probably 80% of the weight is the transportation plan. And I think that makes it daunting and makes it not something that people want to pick up and read. So not that people actually read, paper anymore. But all of these, what that made me think of, because more and more people are paperless and looking at things electronically, we can have links, which we don't have now in our comp plan elements that point to these other plans. See here, link, hyperlink, and advertise that, yes, this is a living document that actually is interactive and takes you to other places. Other images, other, reports, whatever. We can be a lot more dynamic with this document, I think, knowing that. This is great. Thank you. That's all I got.
So, to recap that last great conversation. A sustainability chapter
Mhm.
is a recommendation on the table, which I think makes a ton of sense. And I don't know if it's stewardship, it's sustainability, or just sustainability.
Hmm.
We obviously have the climate plan, as part of that,
Mhm.
or climate action. And then, my suggestion on the environment piece.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what my fellow commissioners would say about this, is focus on the natural environment and not the built environment. I mean, it seems to me that there's a mismatch of, because the environment is this room, right? But I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is truly the natural environment. And if you read what was originally there, the, 5.1 through whatever, 5.2 is all natural environment. I don't know that we need those other sections about built environment or noise and things like that in this section. To me, that if we're gonna really try and do a sustainability chapter,
Mhm.
that built environment, it doesn't resonate with me in that.
We may not have the bandwidth during this cycle, but I've been curious why we don't have a safety element that could encompass those kinds of nuisances or hazards or something like that. Fire protection and things. I mean, it feeds into resiliency in many ways, but I'm used to seeing, again, my past life, a safety element that incorporated some of those more nuisance issues, but also could deal with geologic hazards and some of those other things. So I might just kind of poke around, see if anybody else has something like that, but maybe that's something like that. Maybe we can park some of those other issues that are not about protecting the natural environment somewhere else.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Because your presentation's wrapped up.
It is.
Okay, just something that I would ask you to consider, but the commissioners may want to go a different direction. But if the policy does not support us, if anything in the comprehensive plan, as you're going through it as staff and really trying to help you, if there's anything in there that doesn't support a city goal or a regulation or a future regulation, I just really ask, do we need it? And now you might say, hey, there's some things that the state, commerce requires. That's fine.
Mhm.
But if not, because I think folks are interested in the things like housing, like transportation, like the climate change, and that other stuff, it's to me not helpful or useful. So I hope you'll consider that as you go through this.
Robin, I like your idea about the safety element. I think that is something important because there's a lot of people out there that don't feel safe right now. I don't feel safe every time I drive down Highway 60.
I'm with you there. Absolutely. And that could be, there are a range of things that could be included in that. We don't have anything that addresses, crime and things like that. And maybe that's not the way things are done in Washington. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting piece of life in in Gig Harbor or any other city is feeling safe. Yeah. Or at least having the, quiet enjoyment of your home, as they say, term of art.
That's where
Law.
the MSRC website is probably good to go
Yep.
to and look for like model safety ordinances or, does any comprehensive plan have a safety element? I think that's really got a lot of good stuff in it. for us
It
to
does.
kind of pour through. I want to make clear that everybody, and take a look at both of these two that Robin handed out, because in there is some really good plans, policies that we can make, I think, good use of for this particular element. Especially if it gets expanded to something broader. And I also wanted to mention one other thing. There is a thing on, out there on the Vision 2050 website.
Mhm.
It's called Guidance on Integrating Stormwater Solutions into Comp Plans. I mean, what the things I do around here for fun, right? There's a draft. June 2023
Oh.
draft, and it's where I like it because it shows how there, even that stormwater recommendation says you will find more information about this in different chapters.
Over here,
in
yeah.
the comprehensive plan. So there's some pointing going on, and I don't say it's good or bad, but there's recognition that there are things that kind of relate to stormwater in a lot of different areas. And so the same thing could be said for environment. So, and it also shows model model plans for this particular area. And it's more broader than just stormwater. It gets broader, which is kind of nice because it gets all kinds of good intel. So if you want to spend 4 or 5 hours of your life. I
think we all do.
Share it with my band
It's
of
excellent.
the nerds, as you call them, right?
Yes, proud of that. Yeah, absolutely. Vision 2050 and the website, as you say, there's a ton of really great information, and it really is a very interesting document and website as well. Nice research. Thank you.
Any other summarization, parting shots, comments people want to make? Sounds like we're kind of wrapping up here.
Move that we adjourn the meeting.
Okay, for a second. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.